Okay. For my class, looking at my screen, yes, can I get a thumbs up? You can see my screen? Awesome. And so what we're going to do, and this will not take terribly long, is introduce a new chunk of code, something called an Axios interceptor. And an interceptor kind of does what it sounds like it will do for you. But this idea behind this interceptor, we need to start by looking at some of the code we've already written on our backend Express server. And so if you guys kind of remember back in the days when we were doing permissions in our Express applications, we had roles, we have authentication and authorization. So we have some errors that our backend might throw to our front end that were 403 errors. And those 403 errors were permission-based errors. Like you don't have permissions to see this resource. There was also a 401 error that our backend could send to the front end, saying that you're not logged in. You must be logged in to see the resource, or 401 invalid or expired session. So if the cookie expired, hey Ryan, could you mute yourself, please, sir? Thank you. So we got 403s, we got 401s. We also have our permission-based errors, which were also 403s. What is it? 403, 401. Okay. So point is, how do you handle these in the front end? How do you handle these in a React app? These errors that could be thrown from our front end, we haven't handled those yet. And so that's where this idea of an Axios interceptor comes in. If I were to jump into my front end code, I have an editor with the try catch. And you could imagine we could, in our try catch here, this line is where we're calling our backend Express server and passing through the updated data for doing an update to update a resource, to update a user. And so this error could come back right here. And if that were to happen, if a 401 or 403 were to come back, that would trigger the catch block. And you would have to write, if this error is a 403, else if it's a 401, else if whatever kind of error you have. And so what that opens the door for is repetitive code. Because you can imagine the user editor writing this logic once and then writing this logic again in a similar bug editor or on a new user request, or and so you would find yourself, if you quickly use your imagination, you would find yourself like, hey, I'm writing this code repetitively. And that's where this idea of let's just write the code once in what's called an interceptor. And this interceptor is going to intercept our Axios requests and just handle it. So instead, basically on this line, we'll be modifying this line so that we use an interceptor, which that interceptor uses Axios instead of Axios.patch. And so you'll kind of see how this works as we start to code it. So again, this will be a kind of a new concept for everybody. Let's see. Let me get that over there. And pull this over here. All right. So where I'm going to put this file, it's a front end file. So I'm going to go inside my Vite project folder. Obviously that's my front end. And then I'm going to go in the source code directory. And I've got a lib folder here, which I've already got a couple of TypeScript files inside of lib. So inside of here, inside of this lib folder, I'm just going to call this api.ts. New file, new TypeScript file. And up top, I'm going to bring in Axios, and I'm going to bring in React Toastify so that I can put my backend server errors. Again, I kind of mentioned this once. I'm going to repeat it because you've only heard it once from me. You know, your UI errors like form validation, we're going to put that in a red error message like, hey, your password's not long enough. Your UI errors should go on the form. But when you get errors from the server, from the backend server, we're going to put those errors in a toast. So that's why I'm bringing in React Toastify here. Again, you know, standard data validation errors here, but like if your cookie expired is a different kind of error that we'll throw in a little notification toast. Now, the first line of code here, if you kind of see what we're doing, we're creating this variable that holds, that is assigned to an Axios create. So we're instantiating an Axios instance, if you will. So this API variable is an Axios instance that hits our backend, which is localhost 8080 API. So that's our URL, and that's what's stored in my environment variable. And with credentials is true. So you've seen this code before. With credentials says, hey, we're dealing with an authentication system like BetterAuth. So now when we're referencing this API variable, we're really referencing Axios. And now this is, again, this is how you create this concept of an interceptor. So we say api.interceptors response.use. And parentheses response. It's going to be a lot safer if I copy and paste. So I'm just going to start this as such. So this use, inside of here, we're passing an async function, right? So async await syntax. And let's kind of start closing this stuff. And export default API. Okay, so we're making this variable, and this is an Axios instance, right? And we're configuring this Axios instance with an interceptor that will get a response from Axios and potentially an error from Axios. Now, I'm just going to destructure. So the next thing that we do is we're going to destructure the error into a variable called response. So we're inside of the error block. And we're going to pull out a variable called response from our error object. So realizing this response is in the event that there's an error. So there's a big if block here. So if there's a response, and then if the user is not logged in. So really the first block of code is if the user is not logged in. I did not mean to tab that in, so take that out. So if there's a response out of our error object and the response status is 401, then read the error message. Now keep in mind, so this is a 401. And so let's go back to the 401 on our back end, because we're actually how the back end is sending the data. Response.data.message. If I go back to my middleware is authenticated, this message property, you must be logged in to access this resource. This message property is equal to this message property, right? So we're getting the response, the data stored in a data object, and then this message, essentially this right here, this object right here is equal to our data object. Of course, there's an error and message property. We're reading the message property. Otherwise, we're just saying you must be logged in. Okay, so here's your 401. And then trying to kind of prevent multiple toasts, even though I got to write this code in one more spot. So here now, okay, so here's your error message. And essentially this says, hey, if the toast is not active, then put out a new toast. This line of code was trying to prevent multiple toasts from coming up at once. I'm still getting multiple right now, so I need to fix that. But nonetheless, here, this throws your toast error, right? So kind of, really boiling this down, here's this API. We configure this API interceptor, and if it's a 401, give that error message that says you are not logged in, and throw that error message from line 17, put that in a toast, and then here's kind of the toast information, right? The toast ID is called auth error, and the position's in the bottom right hand of the screen. .403 is really just the same. So here's if it's 401, here's if it's 403. So again, this is going to help us from not having to repeat this code in a bunch of try-catch blocks on our front end on all these different components. We're going to write this once, and then anytime you use this interceptor, it handles all of these back-end errors for us. So it's a really nice and concise way of writing the code. So there's 401, not logged in. 403, you don't have permissions. I wrote a third one, and again, you can write, you can handle all sorts of error codes. Like these are just the three that I chose, but you can continue to elaborate on this. So this is a 400. So there's So here's our 400. And there's one thing left to do, which is, so this interceptor, this API, we export API. The only thing I have left to do is kind of flush out my curlies. And I don't know if there's one more curly needed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the end. And right here, I throw error. And if my curlies line up, I'm not, which is no big deal because I've got the original source code. But essentially, let me clean it up. There we go. So now rethrowing the error is something you do in try-catch blocks, right? So that the error was kind of created here or sent into here, but we still want to catch the error. So here we kind of analyze the error and we threw some error messages, but we haven't caught the error in a try-catch block. And if you remember, structured exception handling, you have to catch that error, otherwise you might crash the application, right? So here we're using the error in this interceptor, but we need to rethrow the error so ultimately that it's caught. Because we don't have any try-catch blocks here. Here we just have if blocks. Okay, so that's nice, and this sets up a nice template for you guys to use this for all of your back-end error messages and all your status HTTP response codes, that can be sent from our back-end. Now we need to use that on our user editor. So if I kind of go back to the front end, so we're in lib, let's go components and find my user editor. Okay, so it's actually quite easy to use once you we no longer need Axios imported here. So I'm actually going to stop importing Axios here. Instead of using Axios, we're going to use, so I'm going to import API from @lib_API. So that's correct. And now if I go down to my Axios calls, this is no longer Axios.get, this simply becomes API.get. And now this API.get will use that interceptor. Anytime we're making an Axios call, we're just going to replace that with API.get, and it will handle our errors. Now, the reason why I get multiple error messages, I'm going to come back and fix this, is multiple toasts, is because I believe set error is throwing a secondary toast right here. So I just take care of that later on. I'll come back to this. Okay, so here's API.get, and then there should be one more API when I actually go to submit the data. So there's my use effect. Here's my handle input change. Here's handle role change. Here's handle submit. So this is no longer Axios patch. This is API patch. And I do think that would be all that I need to code to get this up and running. Incorrect. There was one more piece on my backend route. Remember on my routes for my users, okay, so here my router.patch, so on my back end I'm patching the user by ID. I also want to make sure they're logged in, is authenticated here, just because that was something I did not have before. For whatever reason, I didn't put is authenticated on my update of a user. Okay, let's see if this compiles. Let's go into my V project and do a compile, npm run build. Beautiful. Our front end compiles and builds into its distribution. Let's hop on into our back end. Whoop. Didn't mean to click you. npm run dev on the back end. And here's how we test this. So as I boot this up, localhost 8080 on the back end. Okay, I am not logged in as a user, but if I log in as my admin, I should see my user list, which I do, and I've got a welcome. Go to my user list. I'm going to click on edit on a user. Now the way to test this is you need to log the user out and then try and make an edit. Well, how do you log a user out and then try and make an edit? Well, you need to, cookies can time out, right? So if you actually go into application, this better auth session token, this is my cookie on my front end. And so these cookies can expire. They have an expiration date. But if you don't want to wait for that expiration date, you could just literally come in here and delete, right? So now I've effectively logged my user out. Okay, so I'm not logged in, so I should not be able, the back end should now throw that error. And if I hit it, there you go. We are getting, you must be logged in to access this resource. Okay, so bingo, that is working. We're getting the correct 401, which is coming from response.data.message. So our interceptor is working. Okay, so you could test out each one of these, but for this demonstration purpose, I'm just demonstrating the 401 is working. You got to be a little bit more creative to test these, because what we're doing is we're validating, as I've said, we're validating data on the front end and the back end and the database. And so you got to be creative. If you want to test a 403 that you do not have permission, well, right now, if you're not showing, if based on your role, you're not showing the user the nav bar to even get to a component, they're not going to be able to click on the link. So you might have to temporarily customize your nav bar so a user who doesn't have permission can actually see the nav bar link to click on the component to do the thing they don't have permission to do. Right, so to actually test this, if you really want to be thorough and get down in the weeds there and test out these 403 forbiddens or these other error messages, you might have to be a little creative on how to test them. This one's pretty easy, right? This one's easy to test because you just delete the cookie and you've got that demonstrated. Okay, so the big thing here is this new concept about an interceptor, and you've seen it now in a coding example, and it's really nice because now we don't have to write in our catch blocks. We don't have to catch an error of 401 and 403 and 400 and 4 whatever else exists, 402, and all these different repetitive catch blocks. Okay, so that's what I wanted to demonstrate today. So I'll stop it there. If you guys have questions on any of this, of course, you got me here to help, and I can answer those questions.